Hey guys, welcome to our next section on phonemes and our last section on phonemes before we move into the last half of chapter 2. And we've already looked at consonants in our last lecture from the chart on page 65 of your textbook. We have our 44 English phonemes, and we've looked at 30 of them, which were the consonants. And now we're going to look at the last 14, which were the vowels in the English language. So the importance of vowels. These are central to the English language. Vowels are always voiced in English. So when we talked about consonants, we talked about how some consonants are voiced, meaning they engage those vocal folds, and others are not. When it comes to vowels, 100% of them are voiced. So no matter what vowel sound you produce, you're going to get that vocal fold vibration. What's unique about vowels and why we separate them from consonants is that vowels usually function as the syllable nuclei. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be the syllable nucleus, so the center of a syllable? And I can show you what I mean by that. And keep in mind, we're going to come back to syllables in the later half of chapter 2, because that also plays a role in our study of sound. So unlike consonants, vowels usually function as the center of the syllable. They're pivotal to the syllable. Every syllable in English in a word has a vowel sound in it. Not every syllable has to have a consonant sound, but every syllable to a word has a vowel sound in it. And it's usually the center of that syllable. It doesn't always have to be, and we'll learn a little bit more about that in the next upcoming lectures. But I need to show you what I mean now so you can understand how important the vowel is. So let's look at two English words, for example. So we've got the word back. Again, we're dealing with sounds, so we're not concerned with spelling, because I realize that when you spell the word back, there's 4 letters, so there's really not a center to a 4-letter word, right? But we're talking about sound. And if you take the word back and you break it down into its phonemes, we have three sounds, 3 phonemes: b, a, k. And at the center of that word, back, single syllable word, is our vowel sound, a. Ah. Well, let's look at a 2-syllable English word, hopeful, hopeful. Okay, so if we look at each syllable, we have hope and we have full. And again, we're not concerned about spelling, because if you look at the word hopeful, there's a silent E in there, and we'll talk about that when we get to spelling and writing in our orthography section. But the first syllable is hope, and it has 3 sounds in it. O, p, and O is a diphthong. We'll explore a little bit more about those today in this lecture. But if you go to your chart of all of our phonemes, you'll see that it's under the vowel part, under the diphthongs, the O, as in the word mow. And then hopeful has a second syllable, full. O. It's got 3 sounds in it, and of course the center of that is a vowel. So again, there are some words that maybe have 1 or more syllables, but every syllable has to at least have a vowel in it. Think about the word a, like I need a book, okay? A is a single syllable word, and it's made up of vowels. So we'll explore that a little more, but this is just to stress the importance of how the role vowels play in the language. And there's also many consonants that depend on the vowels in order for you to hear them. So that auditory, the audibility. So in the consonant sound, as in H, is one of those consonants. So we usually don't even hear the sound, but we hear the vowel that follows it, and it's what gives that H, that a little more audibility. It's funny though, because the vowel has become so relied on for words like herb, right, or hola, that the H has actually slowly stopped becoming pronounced in certain words. There's a lot of words that actually the H has kind of fallen silent in, and we see that especially in Spanish with their H sound. And that hasn't always been the case for these languages. Or even the word herb used to be herb. We used to give it that H sound, but it's so subtle, and the vowel has become so important to that word that we've almost stopped pronouncing the H altogether. So vowels are also really tricky because they notoriously shift, especially in English. When we go into orthography, we'll do a quick review of some of the historical change of of English, especially regarding spelling, but a lot happened. There was this movement called the Great Vowel Shift, where all the vowels in English went up essentially an octave, and I'll show you on a chart what I mean by they went up. So vowels in English notoriously shift over time. Historically, they will continue to change. If you remember back in sociolinguistics, when we listened to that clip of English, of that what linguists are predicting English will sound like in 100 years from now, if you go back to that clip and listen, a lot of the shifting was in the vowel sounds. That's where a lot of the change is predicted to take place because historically with English, that's the case. So the other thing that's interesting about vowels is that when you look across dialects of English, that's typically where you find the biggest pronunciation differences are in these vowel sounds. So sure, we see some in consonants like car and ka, right? A lot of stuff with the R's across different dialects, but a lot of stuff with the vowel sounds as well. So they're super interesting and difficult. So that is a feature of English. So let me clarify that in English dialects, the vowel sounds tend to be a good distinction, are a lot of where we'll find the distinctive pronunciation differences between dialects. But that's not the case for every language, because I want to clarify that with Spanish, usually when there's a dialect difference and we're looking at two different Spanish dialects, the difference isn't in the vowel sounds. The vowels in Spanish actually remain pretty consistent amongst the Spanish dialects. It's the consonant sounds where they find the biggest differences across dialects. So there's some good news with vowels, even though I just made it sound doom and gloom and really complicated. And that's this. Every known language in our world, again, known, I stress the word known, shares 3 vowel sounds. And this is super important for a couple reasons. And the number one reason being that no matter the student you're working with, or no matter what language you come from and the language you're trying to learn, every language you're trying to learn or every language you come from will share these 3 sounds. So this is super great because I already can tell you that if I'm going to try to learn Mandarin, I know Mandarin will have these 3 sounds. I can bring in those 3 sounds from my English language into Mandarin and be successful with those 3 sounds. So this is a great thing to have. So all languages have these 3 sounds. Let's take a look at what these 3 vowels are. Keep in mind that the way this graph is set up is to show you where in our mouth we're pronouncing or what we're doing with our mouth to create this sound. So unlike consonants where we needed to do a lot more with airflow and place of articulation, and we could turn off or on our vocal folds, that's not the same with vowels. We're always engaging those vocal folds, and it has more to do with how big or little we're making our mouth. If we're raising our tongue or lowering our tongue, okay? Rounding our lips or opening our lips. So one of those 3 sounds that's shared amongst every language is E, E, okay? Now, if you make that sound, you're going to feel that you raise your tongue to the roof of your mouth, right? E, not flat on it, because then you go, E. That's how I sounded when I had braces when I was 12, right? I had a bridge over my mouth. If any of you have had braces like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It took away my ability to say the E sound. So every time I talked to my best friend Becky, it was, hey, Becky, and I sounded like an idiot. Okay, not an idiot. We've all been there, okay? But it was really hard for a 12-year-old. So we have the E sound, which is in the high front part of our mouth. And then we have these other 2 sounds that are shared with other languages, which is going to be oo as in glue and ah as in father. So let's do all 3 of those sounds in that order and feel the shift in your mouth from going to high front, so almost closed, right, to open in the back. E, oo, ah, okay? There's literally that shift that's going on there. So again, good news. We share all 3 of these sounds with every language in the world. Even more good news, most languages have at least these 5 sounds. Okay, not every language, and you can see the 3 from the other page here, but we can see a couple more, right? We've got E, I, oo, O, and ah. So those are 5 sounds that most every language shares. Those are all vowel sounds. Most English dialects have all 14 vowel sounds. Not every single one does. And let me give you an example here. So we looked at these vowel sounds before, and let's work our way from top to bottom on the left. Say these with me if you're alone and not going to be embarrassed. E, I, a, ah. And this is one, the next one is one I do not have in my dialect. So I only have 13 vowels in mine, but it's like, so ba, ah. I still want to say ah. Ba, ah. Please send me a Flipgrid post of you using that sound. So there's one that I'm inhibited from saying because I just don't, it's not in my dialect. I use the ah for father in place of it. We've got book. And I'm guessing most of you for book just went, ooh. That always happens in face-to-face class because you see that double O and you know that double O can take ooh. No, but not in the word book, okay? And then our final sound is ooh as in glue. And then we move to our diphthongs, right? And these are a little unique because they're basically two vowel sounds put together. Let's make these sounds, and then I want to tell you more about why they're considered one sound. We've got a, I, oi, ow, and o. You'll work a lot with children. If you're working with young children in the future, you will teach them diphthongs. You will help them see this because they need to make the connection between diphthongs and writing. And there's a lot with that bossy E that helps us know it's a diphthong. We'll learn about that in orthography. But with children especially, if you want to help them identify a diphthong sound, you would tell them, as I told you in a past lecture, put your fingers on your cheeks and make the sound. Does your jaw move? If it moves, I think you have a diphthong. So try that with me. A, I, oi, ow, o. Okay. So basically, these are two sounds. We're using two sounds, but we're saying they're one sound. And that's because of the syllable rule. So let's take a look again at syllables, right? So diphthongs are two sounds, but they're in the same syllable. They're next to each other in the same syllable. We're not talking about a consonant being between the sound, because if there is one, then you probably have a two-syllable or more word. Let's look at a single syllable word, hope, right? One syllable. We're not looking at spelling again, because if you notice, hope is spelt with a vowel at the end that gets no sound, just one of those orthography rules we're going to get to. But if we talk about the sounds in the word, we've got ope, okay? And it's a single syllable word. And at the center of that syllable, the nucleus of a syllable is a vowel sound. And we've got one. It's O, O. And yeah, it's a diphthong. It has two sounds to it, right? But we consider it one unique sound in English because it's always found in a single syllable together. We can look at a two-syllable word, hopeful, right? And in that first syllable, we still have our diphthong occurring together in the same syllable. It doesn't span the two syllables. We can look at a word like playground. And in playground, the first syllable, play, a, has a diphthong. And the second syllable, ground, ow, has a diphthong. Yes, maybe some of you noticed that first syllable, play, a, the vowel, a, is not necessarily the center of that syllable. But when we get to that in the rest of chapter 2, I'll explain how we still consider it the central point of that syllable and how we would handle that linguistically. So we have all the, here's our, not our diphthongs, our other vowels, the other 9 monophthong vowels in English, and how they're placed, how you're producing them in your mouth. So if we start with the ones in the front, we've got E, I, right? E as in sheep, I as in bit, as in wet, a as in cat. And then we go to the central where we get our English schwa, that sound. And we use this quite a bit. I'm guessing when I had an exercise with you guys a couple weeks ago, some of you had a hard time identifying the vowels. I said a couple weeks ago, I'm sorry, in the prior lecture where I had you, encouraged you to try to write your name in IPA. I'm guessing, even though we get to do it together in class, that it was the vowel, or even if we had face-to-face class, you would struggle with the vowel sound. The vowel sounds typically are the hardest for all of us to identify. And some of you who definitely were struggling probably ended up finding out that you had a schwa in your name, the sound. And we use this schwa quite a bit, which we'll discover more in our orthography. And then we have our four sounds in the back, which are going to be that ooh, ooh, ah, and that other sound that I have a hard time making. I do have a note here though about rounded lips. Okay, so why did I note that? The thing is, when we're teaching sounds, right, and we're working with students and producing these sounds, some of them are very hard to guide them to produce. It's like, no, close your lips some more. Like, what are you going to do? You might actually take their face and help them shape it, right? Because it is all up here. It's all this work up here. What's nice about these three back sounds, these top, high, and mid back sounds, is a lot of the pronunciation is relying on rounded lips. So sometimes if you find you have a student struggling with any of those sounds, probably not the ooh sound because that's in every language, right? But you can actually help them a little bit in their pronunciation by reminding them with those sounds in particular, we want some lip rounding, right? So we don't say the rounded lips is a central feature to that. So here's our 9 monophthongs in English. Now when you're looking at that chart, right, we go from E to ah, and we're able to produce 14 different vowel sounds with our mouth, but our mouth isn't very big. And so the change that we're making between E as in sheep and I as in bit is actually relatively small, but it does have a huge impact on the type of word we might produce. And we saw this a little bit back in consonants when we were looking at what I called minimal pairs. And I told you we were going to come across them again. And here we're doing it right here. We looked at the word big and pig and found that with the consonants b and p, that they differed in that voicing. And that made a huge difference in terms of what word I was producing. The same thing happens with vowels. So you can look at these minimal pairs right here and see, again, we don't care about spelling, we care about sound, but beat and bit are 2 words that differ by 1 sound. E, I, sit, set differ by 1 sound, and it happens to be the vowel sounds. You can go through all of these and give it a try, and you can write them down phonetically if you'd like, which will help you see how they actually differ by 1 pair. But we're going to differ by 1 sound, and we're going to exercise that in a second. If you're like me with my dialect feature, when I say dawn and dawn, I actually pronounce those the same. So I haven't investigated it, but we've always talked about how dialects, even pronunciation, follows rules. And there's probably a rule that I'm following there that we could investigate and figure it out. But let's dive into minimal pairs. So when I say something's a minimal pair, when I'm saying 2 words are a minimal pair, I'm saying that these 2 words differ by 1 sound. And it's not a hard concept, but it can be a little tricky. And after we go through this exercise, I will tell you why you need to know this. Not only because I've got that TEA symbol in the corner, which means I've seen it on practice exams. I know you might get asked a question on this on the TEA exams, but also because there's real application to it in terms of working with your students and their pronunciation. So in order to identify minimal pairs and looking at this list, the first thing I want you to do is this. I want you to look at the words I've given you, so beat versus bit as an example, and I want you to take your IPA chart and go ahead and write all of these words in IPA, okay? When we're talking about sound, we have to ignore spelling, so you need to first get rid of the spelling and write everything based on the phonemes. So take all these words, just as I did with the example beat and bit, and write everything in IPA. Go ahead and pause the video, and when you hit play and you go to the next screen, I'll show you the answers. Okay, so go ahead and compare your answers to what I've come up with. What I've come up with are the correct answers, unless there's an error in which you need to email me right away and tell me, okay? So what we have here are all the phonetic spellings of these words. Now again, remember, minimal pairs are 2 words that differ by 1 sound. So we want to start at the top here real quick and figure out which of these pairs of words are actually minimal pairs and which ones are not, because there's at least one in here that is not a minimal pair. So for the first example, I'll walk you through that. We want to ignore the spelling and we want to focus on the phonetic spellings. Okay, ignore the English orthographic spellings, focus on the phonemes. Beat and bit. Okay, so when I look at those phonemes, literally, you can tell that there's only one sound that differs between the two words, and that has to do with the vowel in this case, E and I. So these would be considered minimal pairs because there's only one sound difference between the two words. Go ahead and work down through this list, pause the video, and try to figure out which ones are minimal pairs and which ones are not minimal pairs. I have the answers on the next screen, so pause the video now. Okay, so everything in red here is a minimal pair, and the one that's in black is not. Let me address a couple of the ones that are a little more complicated. First of all, let's jump down to chip versus hip. Initially looking at that one, you might have thought, well, this isn't a minimal pair because chip has C-H-I-P and hip has H-I-P, and it's got an extra letter, so I don't think of it as a minimal pair. Or you might have looked at the orthographics or the phonemic spelling and saw that ch gets two phonetic sounds, right? But it really doesn't. The symbol looks like two symbols, but it's just one. Ch. Even though it looks like a T and a weird F thing, it's just one symbol. So they each have three phonemes in it, and they only differ by one phoneme. The first word gets ch, and the second word gets h. So those are minimal pairs. The next one that might have been a little tricky was hall versus all, because again, I said they're words that differ by one sound. Well, technically, yes, these two words, hall versus all, differ by one sound because the H is a sound, and we have the absence of that sound in the word all. So, and I've got a little typo on my screen. I'll be sure to fix that in the main PowerPoint, but the phonetic transcription is a little off. Then we've got ship versus rip. Again, some students struggle with this because they think of sh as two different sounds, when if you look at your IPA chart, it's considered one sound. So those are minimal pairs, differing by the sounds sh and r. And then finally, we get trip versus ship. And these are not minimal pairs, specifically for the reason that trip and ship differ by more than one sound. Trip has 4 sounds in it. T, r, I, p. Ship has 3 sounds. Sh, I, p. So we can look at that T and R sound in the word trip, and those are considered 2 different sounds compared to the sh sound in ship. So these 2 words differ by more than one sound. They differ by 3 sounds or 2 or more sounds. So those are not minimal pairs. Okay, coming back to this, why is this important? What are minimal pairs for? Well, first of all, I know I'm going to see, you might come across this on your exams, but the real reason we care about minimal pairs is because they help students distinguish between phonemic sounds. So some of these English sounds sound identical. Think about the p and the b, okay? So we had the example of the poem versus poem and bohm, right? Sorry, I got another spelling error here. I'll be sure to fix. Now, we had that example in the last lecture when we were looking at consonants of what was wrong with what errors the student making here. Well, for some students, the difference between p and p is very minimal. So when you let them work with minimal pairs, like poem, bohm, a student hears that there's something different there, and it lets them practice with those 2 different sounds and help make further distinctions on how those sounds differ. So if a student is struggling with the H sound, they can go between hall, all, and that's going to help bring phonemic awareness to the existence of that consonant sound, which is very hard to hear because it's not very audible, right? So minimal pairs are useful in helping students work with and distinguish the difference between some of these sounds in English that are very similar in sounding. And it's not just English, lots of languages have sounds that are hard to distinguish the difference from when you're learning it. If you'd like to, here's some practice, and you can pause the screen. This does not include any diphthongs. This only includes the 9 vowels, the 9 monophthong vowels. But go ahead and try to transcribe these in IPA. When you're ready, hit play, and the answers are on the next screen. And here are the answers. Let's quickly jump to our diphthong sounds, which again, those are those vowel sounds that basically are producing 2 vowel sounds at the same time. So the first one we've got is a, as in the word case, and we go from a mid to high to that. I would hope you're at home practicing these with me, but we get a, and those are all still towards the front of our mouth when we're producing them. We've got I. We go from that low back vowel sound up to a front high sound to produce I, as in the word sight. We've got oi, as in boy. We do a low back sound for that, one of those rounded lips, oi, to get up to the high E sound. Next we have ow, to get to that shout sound, and we're keeping it all in the back, ow. And then we've got oh, as in the word mow. Here's a practice exercise. I think these are in your textbooks. I can't recall. But again, this would be practice with those 5 diphthong vowel sounds. So go ahead and hit pause if you'd like to practice these, and the answers are on the next screen. And here are your answers. So let's transition now to bring in Spanish, because I have a lot of bilingual speakers in here. And if you're not a bilingual speaker of Spanish and English, then I'm sure you're still going to engage with the Spanish language a lot when you become an educator. Let me correct that. A lot of you are currently educators and you're just working towards certification or the degree. So a lot of you have been doing this for a long time. So Spanish is awesome because it only has 5 vowels. And as someone coming from a language with 14 vowels, even though I only use 13 of them, this looks great. It gives me some hope that maybe I can learn some Spanish, right? So we've got 5 vowel sounds in Spanish, and here are actually the orthographic spellings. We're going to see that in orthography, which is what's really nice about Spanish is that basically the letter that you would spell it with gets the same sound. Unlike English, where you might spell with a PH or an F, right, or a GH. In Spanish, if you come across a I, it's always probably going to be E, the same sound every time. So it's a lot more clean than English happens to be in that matter. So this is the orthographic spelling, which will probably clue you in on what the sounds actually are. And here we can see the phonemes, okay? So the 5 vowel sounds in English are roughly E, A, U, O, Ah, okay? And so if you have your IPA chart printed off in front of you, the one from page 65, I'd like you to go ahead somewhere and mark these 5 down. So look at the 14 English vowels, and you'll notice these 5 are in there. Spanish and English share these 5 vowels, which is super helpful, but we're going to look at some possible problems with that here in a second. So go ahead and mark these 5 down because I want you to go ahead and complete an exercise where we're looking at Spanish and English together. So somehow keep track of these 5. We want to look at this concept of transfer. And that's basically transfer is this idea of how can you use your first language to help you in your second language, but how does your first language sometimes hurt your use of the second language, right? You're bringing into your second language your first language grammar, pronunciation, lexical items, and sometimes this is great because as I just showed you, English and Spanish share all of the 5 vowels in Spanish. That sounds pretty promising, but what kind of problems might occur then for a Spanish speaker learning English because of that, right? So they already know 5 of the vowels in English, but what happens to the other 9? So just keep in mind with this exercise right here, we're just going to be looking at Spanish vowels and compare right now, but we're obviously going, and we're going to look at English in a second, right? So we're not going to just tease Spanish speakers, we're going to tease English speakers like myself in a second as well. Now, we're just looking at vowels, but there are different consonants between Spanish and English as well. So we could apply this to all of the phonemes. For this example, let's just look at vowels though. So given the 5 vowels in Spanish, okay, and the fact that in Spanish, when you come across the I, the letter I, it's always going to get the E sound. Given those 5 vowels, how might a Spanish speaker approach and pronounce these English words? So we have the English word ship, okay? And as an English speaker, I'm going to give that vowel, that's an I, I'm going to give it this sound, ship, I. Okay, well, a Spanish speaker, given the Spanish language, is going to bring in their 5 vowel sounds. And if you notice, Spanish doesn't have doesn't have that vowel sound. So they're going to reach for the next closest sound. And for a Spanish speaker, that's going to be E. So a Spanish speaker might come across the word ship and say sheep. Okay, so it gets a little funny, right? So I want you to work through these. And again, we're just looking at vowels and figure out, would a Spanish speaker be able to pronounce this vowel the way an English speaker would in these English words? Or is there going to be some discrepancy because they only have the 5 vowels? But again, it's the same could be true of some of these consonants as well. So for example, I know that Spanish doesn't have the sh sound, right? So they're not going to say sheep, they're going to say cheap, cheap. My name is Shelby. I often get Shelby, right? So we have some consonant differences as well. We'll look a little closer at in a later lecture. Go ahead and pause this video though and work through these. On the next slide, I have the potential answers. Okay, so if we were in class together, you would have some chuckles because we often can find some pretty good, some of you can find that you're actually mimicking a Spanish speaker speaking English accent very well. In other classes, when it's been face-to-face, I have a lot of people saying, oh, that's how my dad sounds when he speaks English, right? So you're hearing maybe some people you know in this dichotomy right here because it's a very real problem. And we say problem because I'll give you the terminology for that in a minute, that we're going to take the sound system from our first language, in this case it's Spanish, and we're going to apply it to that second language. And in some cases, like the word father, we have success. It's the same vowel sound. But in other cases, it might be a little more unsuccessful. So I love the example of fed up. We get fade up, fade up, fade up. I love the example of sick. So instead of sick, we get seek. So I'm fade up with being seek, right? It's kind of funny. I love it. But let's take a second here and make fun of some English speakers as well, okay? So, and again, we're educators, so we're not making fun of anybody, but there are some chuckles along the way because this is the nature of the biz. So now Spanish has 5 vowels and English has 14. So a Spanish speaker coming into English is only going to be able to naturally gravitate, they're going to be successful with 5 vowels, but there's going to be 9 of them that they don't innately know and aren't going to apply because they don't have them in their language. The problem with English speakers learning Spanish is the other way around. We encounter the Spanish language and we want to apply all 14 vowels to that language. Okay, so we're not, even though we might be aware, I know that in Spanish you only have 5 vowels. And as a linguist, I know those 5 vowels, but the moment I encounter Spanish, I apply all 14 of my English vowels to your language. And it's called negative transfer, which I'll show you that term in a second. But go ahead and look at these Spanish words, and I want you to figure out, based on the vowels in Spanish and the vowels in English, how an English speaker is likely to pronounce these words. What vowel, and we're specifically talking about vowels because of course this would apply to some of the consonants as well. And let's figure out what an English speaker might do. Go ahead and pause the video and try these and show you the answer on the next slide. Okay, so we've got the word taco, right? In Spanish, when we come across the letter A, we know it's going to get the sound like it, father, salsa. Okay, so we know it's going to get A lot of English speakers make that so taco. I want a taco, like cat, right? Taco. And so we get that problem a lot. I don't know if you've heard that a lot. I hear taco becoming more of an English word now. So we're getting the taco, but you can hear a lot of taco, right? So instead of photografia, you're probably laughing at me. We get a lot of photographia. Instead of sia, I know the L's get that Y sound. We get silla, like maybe sia. So if you look on the right-hand side, so that's chair, correct? So we look at the L1 English speaker pronunciation, and we see that we get the I and the vowel sounds in there, but neither of those exist in Spanish. So you might be laughing at me and also these English speakers on the screen right now, but it's a real occurrence between language learning. And we call this occurrence negative transfer. And negative transfer is when the rules of your first language don't apply to the second language. And so it negatively impacts your use of the second language. When a Spanish speaker applies all 5 Spanish vowels to English, there's 9 vowels they're not using. So there's going to be some speaker errors. They can't rely on just the 5 vowels in their first language. They will negatively transfer into English some of the time because they don't always match. And it's the other way around. We've been spending all this time talking about vowels, but again, this could apply to consonants. And I love this meme right here. How do you explain this 4-year gap on your resume? That's when I went to Yale. That's impressive. You're hired. Thanks. I really need this job, right? So we talk about consonants. Some languages, the consonant J is pronounced as y. So when I went to jail, they're going to say Yale. I really need this job. I really need this job. Okay, so we can see some negative transfer in this linguistic joke right here. There's also such a thing called positive transfer. Positive transfer is when something from your first language enables you to be successful in the second language. So the fact that Spanish and English do share those 5 vowels gives me actually some hope that maybe I can learn Spanish and vice versa for Spanish speaker learning English. There will be some success that I will have with vowels in that language. So I'm introducing these 2 terms to you here amongst phonology, negative transfer and positive transfer, but it actually applies to every spectrum of linguistics. We can have phonological, negative transfer, positive transfer, but we can also have lexical and pragmatic, negative and positive transfer, and we'll look some more at that throughout this semester. So this concept, though, exists in every language. We've spent our time talking about Spanish and English, but negative and positive transfer is a language learning concept that applies to all language learning. One last exercise for you, if you got the time. I'd like you to write down these vowels in IPA. So when I say, what are the vowels in English in writing, right? The typical vowels in English are A, E, I, O, U. These are not phonemes. These are the writing vowels. And we get sometimes Y as well. I didn't include that on here. But if I'm going to tell you, spell A in phonemes, there's a diphthong that you would write. I'm pronouncing a diphthong, A. So go ahead and take these 5 vowels and write out the phonemes, the phonetic spelling with each of them. The answer is on the next screen, so pause if you need to. Okay, so we got A, the letter A gets the diphthong sound A. E gets that sound E, and I have the wrong symbol there, which I'll be sure to correct. I gets the diphthong I, O gets the diphthong O, and U gets the diphthong, or gets the vowel and the consonant U. Okay, I bring this up for this reason. My son last year was in 1st grade, and he asked, how do you spell sad? Okay, so he wants to know how to spell the word sad. He's got his little writing journal, and I don't know why he wanted this word. It actually sounds pathetic the more I describe it, but he wanted the word sad. And I said S-A-D. And I really slowed down my speech so he could hear each letter. S-A-D. And I was amused when he showed me how he spelled it, and he spelled it S-A-E-D. And I thought that's really interesting. He was hearing that when I was saying the letter A, that he was hearing I was producing a diphthong in it, and he spelt that diphthong out as the letters A and E. So I thought that was really amusing. I don't know that there's a takeaway from it, except you should be observing things about language, because you'll keep noticing how phonemic awareness is so ingrained in those early years of language learning. And whether it's your first language, you're learning English, or you're learning a second language, These are the type of things that our learners are picking up on, and we need to be able to know what type of air they're making. I know my son, what air he's making here. He's hearing the diphthong as 2 letters, A. So you need to be able to identify those silly types of errors because they're real to the student. Okay, so that ends this section. We are going to transition now into sections 2.4 through 2.9. So I want you to read those in your book. So we're in the chapter of phonology. Okay, so we're going to wrap up chapter 2 in these next lectures, or the lectures over those next sections. When we talked about phonology, we've been spending all this time on phonemes, right? So those 44 sounds in the English language, and we looked at Spanish a little bit, and we've been talking about sounds. And phonology is the study of sounds in a language. But when we're studying phonology, we're studying more than just phonemes. There's lots of different ways to look at sound. So there's sentence segmentation, and that's helping a child understand that a sentence is made up of lots of words. Okay, so hearing words. Students need to be able to hear syllables. Students need to be able to hear word stress. So what's the difference between progress and progress? Think about those 2 words. They're spelt the same, but we put stress on them differently. Intonation and phonemic awareness, which has a whole array of things that helps bring awareness of phonemes. These are all areas that fall under this category of phonological awareness that is part of studying phonology. You had to, so we're going to move past phonemes and into these more teacher applicable topics. So be sure to read the textbook, and we'll move on to that information when it's available to you. Contact me if you guys have any questions. Thanks.